we are going to explore the idea that we can bring accountability to human social ideas. I will be reading from a book titled The Coercive Animal that I published back in 2009. Since time has passed, minor changes to the original text will be made to update to current times. Further, I will stop reading and add comments as felt needed. Please note that the largest change to the book's text is that the word thesism in the book will be changed to Seryla's philosophy, as the premise of this work lies somewhere between hypothesis and thesis. The Coercive Animal, a new moral revolution. To start, let us read the summary on the back cover, as this will provide us a condensed view of what is up and coming. Let us start. The coercive animal exists because our social system of thought throughout the history of mankind have been unaccountable. Our use of reason and rational thought allowed us to place the idea of reality anywhere one senses it to be. From this ambiguity, we have our history of ideas by decree from ancient philosophy to our modern thinkers. Our religious thought, our rational thought, our governments, and our economic systems, they all operate without accountability. When we learn how ideas work, we understand how we move ideas within our minds to create ideas that may or may not relate to reality. We then understand how to categorize our ideas. From this, we discover how people can create intellectual shell games by initiating movement between broadband and narrowband ideas, as well as between universal and limited ideas. When we have this knowledge, we expose the coercive animal. Historically, we have defined coercion as the arbitrary will of one person forced onto another. Nevertheless, what are arbitrary and non-arbitrary wills? This book removes the ambiguity by taking the arbitrary out of arbitrary. How we distinguish between the two resides within the pages of this book, The Coercive Animal. Roman page number IX. There is a religious story about a woman named Eve who lived in the Garden of Eden. This story claims she went against the command of her God not to eat the apple of knowledge to good and evil. Nevertheless, she did, and it is claimed her actions threw humankind into darkness. Well, I have a different interpretation. Eve did not eat the apple of knowledge to good and evil. Rather, she had eaten the apple of fantasy to good and evil. This story explains the start of when we move the idea of reality obtained from our physical world to newly constructed ideas that contained no reality. We had the birth of arbitrary wills and the coercive animal. It was then that we lost sight of our Garden of Eden. This swept us from our firm footing and threw us into darkness. Since then, we have had a rich history of human ideas. They have been rich in fancy and in grandeur. From that day we took the apple of false reality, we never have held our ideas to accountability. Science tried to return us to normalcy and to truth, but we have confined our rational vision carefully to a squint of an eye. Contents. Introduction. Roman page XV. During my junior year at the University of Detroit, 1975, I spent a semester in the stacks searching and reading research papers on blind obedience to authority. Obedience to authority does not require a dominant person that coerces people to submission. Rather, obedience to authority resides in any one of us who will close our free will and give our personal responsibility to any authority figure. Because of this, we can have tyrants. We can have one person, by virtue of perceived authority, remove the individual personal responsibility across a mass of people and have them commit crimes without moral considerations. During my lifetime, I have seen the coercive actions of human beings many times over. I have seen the coercive actions of bigotry, racism, blind patriotism, communistic domination, capitalistic domination, and religious intolerance. I have seen wars in Korea, Vietnam, and Kosovo, Afghanistan, and twice in Iraq. I have seen apartheid in South Africa and the slaughter of people across many nations. I know the history of World War I and II, the Civil War, and the violent reconstruction afterwards. The Mexican-American War, the War of 1812, slavery, human indenture, and so on we go, with a coercive history as far back as records exist. Now, since 2009, we have had continuance of the coercive animal. At the time of this reading, 2024, we have coercion taking place between Russia and Ukraine, and Israel and Palestine. Now imagine, I'm only one person in one life experience. Now, I am like most people. What I think to be true, I think to be right. Nevertheless, what I think to be true and to be right, when measured against the output of thought by humankind, I find contradictions. I find rationalizations for the existence of opposing conclusions. On one hand, we have the idea that some people are simply superior in intellect, and on the other hand, we have the idea that our existence is relative. Therefore, most people do not concern themselves when we have contradictory conclusions. What I think to be true, I think to be right. What you think to be true, you think to be right. In these two lines rests the answer. I think, you think. We confuse reality with the action of thought. Our rational thought only requires our sense of it, and in that sense of it, we maintain our decision of truth measured solely within our minds. Now, we often define coercion as an arbitrary will forced on an individual. In turn, the arbitrary will forced on an individual then denies their freedom and liberty. However, what determines an arbitrary will from a non-arbitrary will? To determine arbitrary versus non-arbitrary, it requires an assessment. An assessment requires a form of measurement against something. Further, we have been using religion and rational thought to make our determinations. Both operate within what I think to be true, I think to be right, and what you think to be true, you think to be right. Nevertheless, truth does not reside in our minds. What determines our truth resides outside of us. This means we must take ourselves out of the equation. In this book, The Coercive Animal, we find our source of measurement to determine arbitrary versus non-arbitrary will. We then can determine justified and unjustified coercion. When we measure our ideas under the correct source and know the difference, we can eliminate unjustified coercion and release our freedoms and liberties. In The Coercive Animal, we examine in Book 1 our old measurement systems of rational and religious thought. We examine their deficiencies and demonstrate that they are systems of thought without accountability. We then introduce the corrected system of thought through Seryla philosophy that brings us our needed accountability. In Book 2, we examine our historical and philosophical thought systems. In Book 3, we examine their effect on our view of government and capitalism today. In Examine Capitalism and Not Socialism, I am in no way implying one over the other. Rather, it is my view that both derives from a singular and physically based expression of our human constitution. Both, when carried to extreme ends, results in suffering. Finally, for me, truthfulness and honesty were virtues instilled into me during my formative years. From my youth onward, I had a simple maxim that I carried with me throughout my life. It went like this: I have to accept the truth of things, no matter how unpleasant or undesirable it may be. Without my understanding or knowledge, this stance opened my free will to accept truth with minimal distortion. I can make this claim because my source of measurement of truth does not reside in me. My open free will is measured against our creation and creator, and that is physical existence. Over the course of my life, I have learned that truth is not cold or harsh. It is enlightening and freeing. It brings us clarity to our condition and our needed interactions. Before us resides our source to infinite wisdom. Truth takes away our fears and reveals our common cause and direction, and how to reach our balance and justified happiness. This ends the introduction to Seryla's philosophy. The next episode will start with Book 1, Seryla Philosophy, Rational Thought with Accountability. We will begin to define coercion and question: is our use of reason accountable? Is our use of rational thought accountable? Is our use of religious thought accountable? Human survival with our Creator, physical existence, thought existence, how ideas work. So, have you enjoyed this commentary? If you have subscribed, thank you. If you haven't, please do, and lovingly hit that like.